Hey, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Some of you I will not be seeing in person. Well, actually, most of you, most of you I will not be seeing in person. Though we do have one in-person event next Sunday, which is our Tashlich on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And we are today continuing the hard work of getting this service ready for everybody, including
Rabbi, do you not sleep at night?
there are times as this time of year when the warm embrace of sleep is not.
I mean, I got an email from you at 3 o'clock in the morning.
That was that was 3 o'clock in the morning, but it was 6 o'clock somewhere.
There you go.
6 o'clock in New York. Listen, I had a talk yesterday. I'll tell you before we get started. I had a talk yesterday, a discussion, phone conversation at about, speaking of time difference, at about, I don't know, it's one of the few times that I wasn't working yesterday. I was at the grocery store, and I had a phone conversation yesterday with somebody who I never would have thought, well, thank God he's still alive, but I never would have thought I'd ever be speaking to him on a phone like a friend. I mean, he's not a friend yet. I mean, he just started talking. Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Oh, really?
Oh,
And
I'm impressed.
I'm impressed. I still don't believe it happened. So where's the thing I sent him? Because, I was raised on his music. And I mean, literally, the first albums I probably ever saw in my house were, I sent him a picture.
You wrote some good music.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, he wrote Light One Candle. So
Right.
I started out the conversation by saying how much I love his music. And so I was introduced to him by Craig Taubman, the Jewish singer. And so we're talking about, I don't know if any of the stuff that he's doing is going up. Well, he's going to be part of a discussion that we're doing. We by JLTV is sponsoring with Craig, where we're going to be talking about Jewish music, and that is coming up on. Hold it one second. That is coming up on. It's a discussion that we're doing that will be broadcast, and I'll be posting links to on Yom Kippur. It is called My Song, The Art of Jewish Music, with Craig, Dave Cause, our friend Gabriel Mann, and also Peter Yarrow. So that's going to be on Yom Kippur. But so probably none of his music will be up ready yet either, unfortunately. But the cool thing is that he's also working on some new music and trying to get young musicians and writers, trying to teach them how to write music for today, because he is definitely of the impression that if there's ever a time to sing, it's now, and to inspire people. And so he talked about John Lewis, and he talked about how John Lewis had said that music was without music, there would have been, the civil rights movement wouldn't have taken off. And he said it was like the wings to the movement. And so we talked about the fact that people don't write songs definitely that inspire people that way anymore. I mean, I guess some people say there are genres, but not popular, well, I shouldn't say that. They're popular, but they're very niche kinds of genres of music. And we were talking about the fact that there aren't many bands in the last 30, 40 years that have had the ability to cross over from the mainstream and also have meaning, for the songs to have meaning or wider social meaning. So he's not any less political than he was 50 years ago. He had some pretty harsh language for today's situation. So it's not going to be political at the high holidays, anything he does, or actually, I'm not sure what he's going to talk about in the discussion, but I don't think it'll be politics. But oh yeah, he's no less passionate and creative, and it was pretty inspiring just talking to him. I mean, he's older. I mean, clearly he's older, but
Did you possibly get him to speak for the synagogue?
oh yeah,
Maybe
no,
for a fundraiser?
he's he's definitely up for that, and we just started that relationship so that he but I took a picture of actually I might have it. Took a picture of me with some of my mom's Peter Paul and Mary albums, and I told my sister later. Oh, here it is. I told my sister later that I was on the phone with him, and she almost cried. She was like, "Oh, Mom would have been like, she would have been so happy." And I said, "Yeah, it's definitely here." So I sent her that picture. You see it? So I said, I wasn't kidding when I told you that these were the albums that I had with our house, and yeah. Yeah, I mean, we didn't exactly dance to that music, but we had whatever. I mean, that was the music that was going on in the background. So at many points in my life. Anyways, so yes, you'll definitely see him
Having Peter.
spending some time with us, but it is really hard to kind of tone him down on the that's what am I going to tell him? I mean, he's he's a legend.
An activist.
Yes, he's a legend. I'm not going to go, hey, don't be so political, because that's exactly what
He spent his whole life sitting in the tree.
yeah. So I actually kind of made apologies for my generation. I said, I'm in my 50s, and we haven't had a lot of people doing that kind of stuff. So he goes, no, he basically said it's a culture of money, and he's, people are concerned with, preserving the monetary structure. And again, didn't get into his personal take on money and those kind of things, but yeah, I don't know. I assume he lives it. Well, anyways, we're gonna get going in a second. I think I figured out how to get. I think I figured out how to get the Google login so that I could share on Facebook. So it required updating things and making sure everything was good. So I'm going to try live streaming now. Because I said Facebook, changed their stuff around there. Beginning of September, they made people go to a different their new thing. So I'm going to stop that share, and now we're up. And I'm going to record. We're still waiting for some people, I know, but we're going to get going. And while I do not have a commitment right after, we are going to maybe a little bit early. Well, I should say I do have a commitment, which is I'm supposed to be taping today. I'm supposed to, the one thing about having other people work with us right now on this for High Holidays is that I can work on it. I'm not gonna give you my secrets, but I will tell you that oftentimes I'm writing sermons the night before, not the whole thing, but polishing them up. But when I have people that are counting on on videography and editing and those kind of things, I have to get things to people on time. So the good news is I'll be well rested for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You just won't. You have to take my word for it. You won't actually see me. But yes, as Mike was saying earlier, there's not a whole lot of sleep going on right now. But with that being said, we're looking forward to studying this morning, and I'm going to see if Jeff is on from he's on in Colorado. What's the weather like in Colorado right now, Jeff? You're not on. Yeah, Mary. Nope, you're not on. Can't hear you.
You're muted.
Still muted. There, now
Hi.
you're, now
Yeah,
you're,
it's about 75 the temperature. Last week we had snow. Last Tuesday.
yeah, I saw a picture that
Yeah.
that it was sticking on the
Yes.
ground.
Yeah, that was fun for one day.
I'm in Kansas.
And yeah, Diane's in Kansas, which is, you're actually pretty close to Jeff Stein.
Yeah.
People forget how close Colorado is to
Yeah.
Kansas. But yeah, and I'm looking to see if any.
We're across the valley from you, Mark.
Yeah, I know, but I could not see you because
Oh,
the air here is
All the
still.
smoke.
still
Yeah, I haven't been able to see your house in weeks.
Did you? I don't know if anybody else had, but I actually woke up yesterday to. I haven't even been outside really yet, but I had ash raining down on my car.
oh.
Yeah, we have a lot of ash. There's a lot of ash holes around.
But did you actually? Was it raining on your car yesterday? I mean, raining out on your car.
On Mary's car is out in the street, so yeah, it was full of ash.
Yeah, so I wanted to get my car washed before Rosh Hashanah. I try to get it washed at least twice a year, whether it needs it or not. Before Passover and before Rosh Hashanah are my little high holiday and Passover traditions, holiday traditions. I have not done it yet because it seems pointless. Every day it gets dirtier and dirtier. All right, well we're gonna get started. I was trying to see if Judith was coming on too, or maybe her dad. But yeah, it was pointless this year or so far to do this. I'll tell you too, one thing before we get started. So I actually I got an fender bender in my own driveway. And I have to tell you, it was really not my fault, but because I can't even believe this happened. So it was literally 2 weeks ago. So when my dad passed on Tuesday, right after the class, not even right after, but soon after. And then Wednesday, I had to go to the cemetery. So this is literally 2 weeks ago. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks, no, 3 weeks ago. So I was driving. I had to drive. I was picking up my stepmother, and we're driving down to Home of Peace. So I'm backing out of my driveway, and as I'm backing out of the driveway, a truck comes into my driveway, which was weird because like it happened in an instant. But I'm like, what was that? It was somebody a delivery company was coming in to drop off flowers that my wife's company had graciously sent to us. So as I'm literally on the way to the cemetery, and I mean, I wasn't rushing out, but I was, it was not a drive I wanted to do it in the first place, let alone go down to it's East LA, Downey. It's right at the 710-5. So, you never know how much traffic there's going to be. I didn't want to be, didn't want to be late, whatever. And now I've got to exchange insurance information and stuff with people in my own driveway. And I was pretty ticked off. I was also ticked off. I like, why does somebody even come in your driveway? It's like, park out on the street. I asked the insurance company though, and they said there's no rule in California that somebody can't do that. So unless I've been lied to, I was a little shocked to find out that somebody can literally just park in your driveway. It's something I guess I wouldn't do that. I would, anyways. It was not what I wanted to do, and I told Tracy as it happened. I said I went in. I started getting the stuff together. I said, you know what, Tracy, you go out and deal with it because I'm going to lose it right now. I'm already upset, and now I have to. And the damage to my car was worse than theirs. So, anyways, in the end, they said they can't prove whose fault it was, so it was even worse. I had to, be partially responsible. So, I don't know. Just so you know, people can park in your driveway. And
if they couldn't park in driveways, Mark, I'd be in big trouble because I'm on a flag lot, and everyone would have to
I know. But yeah, I don't know. I felt like it was an invasion of my space. But anyways, and because again, I have an alert thing on my car. A beeper, whatever. It's rear sensor, whatever. Right?
Didn't help you.
It didn't, but it happened so fast that it didn't help. But it's also because I didn't back up into it so much as person came up behind me. Anyways, so not what you wanted, not what you wanted to have at that moment. So we are going to get started this morning with, and it's been building up for weeks, but today we're going to actually read about Jacob dying. So the Torah definitely has a buildup in the sense that there's the last two chapters, or the chapter 48 and 49 are about the death of Jacob and the blessing of the children. And then the last thing that we read actually is the, I'll put it up here, is, and you'll see it's literally the last chapter is, that's not the page I want to show you though. So it is good to see. Yeah, why not? Why don't we do that? Yeah, I'll show you, remind you. Hey, Rosh Hashanah is coming. Anyways, there it is. Rosh Hashanah. So let us go to this. So let's take a look at the Torah, and it says the very end of chapter 49. Well, Jacob tells the families we've read, and we've already read this. Bury me with my fathers in the cave of Machpelah. And so we know that this is the instructions to be buried in that place, and it goes through by again telling us it's the cave my grandfather bought from Ephron the Hittite. All this description of the place, and then it says the last verse is when Jacob finished his instructions to his son, he drew his feet into the bed, and breathing his last, he was gathered to the people. We also read that Jacob, gets kind of this gift from God that he gets time to put his affairs in order, that up until this time, people just kind of died. Here, he knew it was happening. He went through an illness. And so he knows that he can do this. And again, it seems like Isaac, his father, did that too. But the problem is when Isaac blesses Jacob and Esau, he does it decades before he dies. It's like he thinks he's going to die, but he doesn't die. And we don't really read about Isaac's last moments. Here, we don't read a lot, but we read a little bit. And then chapter 50 is now, he's dead. And so chapter 50, as you can see, I'm going to show you, is 26 verses. And this is the only part of the last half of Genesis where Jacob isn't alive. So it's very clear that the last part of Genesis, the last 26 chapters, Jacob is in the background the whole time. Even during the time of Joseph, when we're reading about Joseph, Jacob is in the background. Jacob is there. Now he's not. This is the only part of again, the last 25 chapters of Genesis where Jacob is now technically gone. He can't do anything, and he's now a memory. So, and I will say, because you're looking at it right now, Jacob's death or his preparation of his body is the first 3 verses of the last chapter anyway. So even when he's dead, he's not gone. Because the first 3 verses of the chapter are about that. It says Jacob flung himself on his father's face, wept over him, and kissed him. Then Joseph ordered the physicians in charge in his service to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed him. It required 40 days for such as the full period of embalming. The Egyptians bewailed him 70 days. So it's pretty clear that, again, he's mummified. This is not Jewish tradition. The burial is Jewish tradition, but the preparation for burial is not. And the Torah points that out by telling us it took 40 days for him to actually be ready because of the embalming procedure. Now, you could make the argument he needed to be embalmed because he's going to be brought back to Israel. That's fair. I mean, that's almost like, hey, this is why we had to do it. But there also is this possibility of, he's not supposed to be embalmed. Jews were not traditionally supposed to be embalmed because they were supposed to be buried right away. Now, I will tell you that the Torah actually says, the Hebrew says, Joseph commanded the physicians in his service. That's the word. Rofim, like the word rofeh, to heal. It says the rofim. to embalm his father, and that's the word chanot. So the people who did it in Egypt, or at least the closest word that our ancestors in Hebrew could come up with for embalming was doctors. It's interesting because we don't have the word a lot in Hebrew. We don't have in the Torah. We don't have the word for embalming because it wasn't really our thing. But the closest we could come up with is the medical practitioners of the time. And again, the word today for doctor in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, is a rofeh. We never call them an embalmer. Actually, I'm not sure what the Hebrew term is for an embalmer because it's also not done very often in Israel. But it is. It is. I'm going to look that up actually because now I'm curious how you'd say embalmer in Israel. But and they must have them. I mean, I'm assuming that. Even though most people
they're Christians and all that.
Yeah, and I just think that they would, right? You know, they have to do it now. But it's interesting that again, for us, or at least for our ancestors, I would say, that the medical procedure that went into embalming somebody, the closest thing we could come up with is a doctor, which again is weird because it's almost the opposite of healing somebody, but it is preserving the person, it is preserving them. So again, this is the word we have for it in Hebrew, and it is, you know, again, I wanted you to see it literally is the word rofim. It is the word for heal. All right, so let's take a look and see what the Midrash does with this. And again, because there's a lot more in the Midrash to the story, right? There's going to be a lot more before a lot more, but there's some interesting things before he dies. All right, so Rosemary, you want to take it?
Okay. You have to put the text up.
Let me get that up there for you. And here's where we are, the death of Jacob.
The death of Jacob. After Jacob had blessed each of his sons separately, he addressed himself to all of them together, saying, "According to my power did I bless you, but in future days a prophet will arise, and this man, Moses, will bless you too, and he will continue my blessings where I left off." He added besides that the blessing of each tribe should redound to the good of all the other tribes. The tribe of Judah should have a share in the fine wheat of the tribe of Benjamin, and Benjamin should enjoy the goodly barley of Judah. The tribes should be mutually helpful one to another.
Yes, interesting little midrash that, again, they put it here. I mean, you could have argued they could have, Ginsburg could have put it with the previous, collection of midrash. But again, this idea that the blessings were not for one individual tribe, but that the tribes there's synergy, the fancy word we use today for cooperation and strength of creativity and production between groups is businesses. It would work for the tribes. So it's kind of nice that message was there, that this wasn't for the benefit of one tribe, but for all the tribes. All right.
Moreover, he charged them not to be guilty of idolatry in any form or shape, and not to let blasphemous speech pass their lips. And he taught them the order of transporting his bier thus: Joseph, being king, shall not help to bear it, nor shall Levi, who is destined to carry the ark of the Shekinah. Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun shall grasp its front end, Reuben, Shimon, and Gad its right side, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin the hindmost end, and Dan, Asher, and Naphtali its left side. And this was the order in which the tribes, bearing each its standard, were to march through the desert, the Shekinah dwelling in the midst of them.
Wow. So here's an interesting midrash that if you look at how they came up with this, they're saying when you go into Numbers and you see how the tribes were ordered, it goes back to this. It goes back to the way that Jacob's body was carried back. So it's the same way that the Shekinah, that the the divine presence accompanied the Jews when they had the ark around them back to Jacob's body. So there's a historical connection to the order and to the way the tribes will eventually, when they come back many years later from Egypt, they're going to be in that same order. All right, here's another interesting deathbed order, which we don't have in the Torah.
Jacob then spoke to Joseph, saying, "And you, my son Joseph, forgive your brethren for their trespass against you. Forsake them not and grieve them not, for the Lord has put them into your hands, that you should protect them all your days against the Egyptians."
So here's a really interesting text that's not there. You may want it to be there. The rabbis maybe wanted it to be there. There's a lot of reasons to want it to be there, but it's not there. I just showed it to you. He didn't do that. He didn't tell Joseph to forgive his brothers, though, as we do know, the brothers tell Joseph that. That's actually what chapter 50, there's a lot of interesting little things in those 26 verses that we have in chapter 50, but that's one of the interesting ones that, again, after the brothers die, after the father dies, the brothers come to him and say, hey, well, actually they say to each other, maybe our brother's going to take vengeance on us, right? So you remember that part of the story, that I'll show it to you right now in chapter 50. It says that when Joseph's brothers saw they were dead, they said, their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong that we did him? So again, they recognize this. But we've talked about this before. It's a great lesson about forgiveness and the fact that sometimes when you are forgiven, you don't believe you're forgiven. And you can't believe that somebody could forgive you, maybe because you wouldn't have forgiven them under the same circumstances. And it says that they sent a message to Joseph saying, before his death, your father left this instruction. First shall you say to Joseph, forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive. So now, bless you. So now, we normally think that the brothers invented that. They lied. That they, protected themselves by coming up with this deathbed, promise. According to the rabbis, it's not a lie. It actually did happen. That Jacob actually did say that. Again, I think that Midrash actually takes away from the power of what the brothers did just now, which is not lie so much as for just the sake of lying, but to protect themselves and their families, hoping that, again, that they can stop Joseph from
Rabbi, we don't know that it's a lie. I mean, according to Torah, we don't know that. It doesn't say one way or the other.
It doesn't say it, but it takes away, the Midrash actually takes away from what the brothers did if they made it. Because what I think that story tells us is that the brothers are so unsure of this. Now, if Jacob really did say it, then it's not them protecting themselves. Well, they are protecting themselves, but they are simply reminding their brother about what the father said. I like the idea that they were like thinking and trying to say, hey, wait a second, we better protect ourselves now. Maybe Joseph didn't attack us while our dad was alive, but now that he's dead, it's going to come down now. So look, I think it reflects human nature, which is that we start to panic sometimes that we really aren't forgiven, and when we're in a position where we need that person who we've wronged to actually now show that they have forgiven, that we sometimes are uncomfortable. Look, it's true. I mean, that's the thing about it. So if they did lie, it's actually reflecting a real truth to human behavior, which I think is an interesting, powerful lesson on its own. But yes, the rabbis didn't like it.
But I guess what you're saying, and I kind of agree with you, that Jacob could have told Joseph before he passed on his deathbed that This is what I want you to do.
That's actually what it says that they did, that he did, which is weird because you'd think that if it did happen that he would have said that, but that the Torah would have recounted that. But whether it happened or not, the Torah doesn't tell us it happened, and so we're left with this possibility that the brothers are really, really doing a, as they call it, a CYA, right? And they do it to such an extent that they're willing to lie to their brother. Again, because they feel that was such a bad thing that they did. So now there's another piece of this which Jacob, according to the Midrash, does, which is, well, if we take it to a full extension, it's pretty wild. All right, let's read this.
Also, he admonished his sons, saying that the Lord would be with them if they walked in his ways, and he would redeem them from the hands of the Egyptians. I know, he continued, great suffering will befall your sons and your grandsons in this land. But if you will obey God and teach your sons to know him, then he will send you a redeemer who will bring you forth out of Egypt and lead you into the land of your fathers.
Okay. So again, this Midrash kind of follows some of what we've read in other places, that Jacob and the other patriarchs, well, we know that Abraham is told that your descendants will be slaves. We know that. I mean, Abraham knows that. Abraham is told that. So could he have told, could the story been passed down? Well, maybe. And again, kind of explains why Jacob was hesitant to have people go down to Egypt, knowing that this is going to happen. But it also means that the Jews knew, the Israelites knew, Jacob's sons and then now grandsons know that there are really bad times ahead, which again, by extension, like, I mean, you could make the argument they were trapped. They couldn't get out because Joseph, was in charge. There was still maybe a famine back at home. I mean, I don't know. You have to come up with like all the, if we follow this Midrash, and then we have to take by extension what the setup is for this, which is that it's really going to be bad, and we knew it was going to be bad. Now, part of what I find very powerful about this Midrash is the fact that this is literally written for most of the last 2,000 years, and it was written sometime in the last 2,000 years. This Midrash was the product of this experience of Jewish powerlessness for the last 2,000 years, which is essentially, yeah, things are bad now, and eventually they'll get better, but it's going to take a long time. So this promise that there'll be a Moses, of course, is not really just that there's a promise for them that there's going to be a Moses, but a promise for Jews in the next 2,000 years that things will eventually get better. And it's really, really sad that, for us, when we read the story of Joseph, we kind of say to ourselves, get out of there, don't go to Egypt. But for much of Jewish history, and again, most of the last 2,000 years, it was like, okay, but we leave here and we go somewhere else, and it's going to get bad there too. I mean, you go from Spain and you go to France. Guess what? It's going to get bad there too. And then you go back here, it's going to get bad there too. So you just go from one land to the other, and it's going to get bad. So it's only a matter of time. And I think that, again, this Midrash reflects a really, really kind of sad reality, which is, for us today, we read it and we go, just get out of there. And go where? It's going to be bad somewhere else too, until there's a redemption. So it's a much different situation for us to read this today. But hell, read it 80 years ago. If you're a Jew in Holland or a Jew in Germany, if you're the you're Otto Frank and his family, taking them from Germany to Holland, where are you going to go? So it is a tough thing to read and to recognize that this was too much. This was too much of our history. So again, the Midrash is that Jacob knew this. Jacob knew, and then by extension, now the kids know that this is on the horizon, that this is going to happen. So pretty powerful. So here is Jacob dying.
In resignation to the will of God, Jacob awaited his end, and death enveloped him gently. Not the angel of death ended his life, but the Shekhinah took his soul with a kiss. Beside the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, only Moses, Aaron, and Miriam breathed their last in this manner through the kiss of the Shekhinah. And these six, together with Benjamin, are the only ones whose corpses are not exposed to the ravages of the worms, and they neither corrupt nor decay.
Yeah. Now it's interesting that Benjamin was put up with that list, but let's just mention this for a second. There's also a midrash of that we've read that Adam and maybe Eve too, they don't decompose, but that these patriarchs don't decompose. It doesn't say the matriarchs don't. I mean, I do want to point out that the patriarchs are not listed there, but Miriam is listed there. So if you're going to say, well, would it have just maybe that includes it? Not necessarily, because Miriam is actually singled out. Now, again, it could be more of a mathematical balance that there's three, and then there's three, and then there's plus Benjamin, which is a weird one because Benjamin, of all the sons, why is he the one that doesn't decay? Now, I will tell you that one of the things that's going on here is, first of all, it's like what is going on here? I mean, well, first of all, human bodies normally decay. Okay, so if you're mummified, not going to decay, obviously, like normal. But here's the weird thing. In Judaism, as it was in other traditions too, if a body didn't decay, it was seen that the person in life must have been really, really holy, really special. And so it's not just Jews that kind of looked at this as a sign the person was very special, that their body didn't decay. That was considered to be an indication of righteousness, of merit. Obviously, people didn't want to see a body decay, which of course then gets to another question. Why is this even something anyone would know? In Judaism, we know we're supposed to bury a body. We're not supposed to disturb it. We're not supposed to look at it even, right? We're not even supposed to have open caskets. How would anybody even know this? Well, it's actually an indication of what Jewish burial practices were like, which is, it's not that the person was buried in the ground, number one. Number two, it means that people did see the bodies decaying. And what we do know is that they took the bones and they put them in a box after the body had decayed. After the flesh was off the body, and it took roughly about a year of it being left out, not in the outside elements, but in a cave, then they would bury those bones in a box, keep that box on the shelf in that cave, and then the next person would go there and they would decay, and then they would go into a bone box. Now, again, that's definitely moving the body. There's no question that that's disturbing the body, if you will. But at least that time in Jewish history, which was at the time of Jesus, by the way, this is what would have happened to Jesus's body. They would be put in these ossuaries, and so if a person went through the normal decay, after about a year, they'd be put that way. But these bodies never decayed. again, we don't know if Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and during the time of Moses and his siblings, they did this ossuary. We don't believe that was the case. At that time, we actually believe that they were buried. But at the time, the Midrash, they would have seen bodies and they would have known whether a body decayed. So it's actually more of an indication of when this Midrash was written than probably, again, what really happened. But it is strange. And again, it does give us a little indication of when this was written. But I think more importantly, we also have this Midrash that we saw again in the death of Moses. What's the best way to die? Not with the angel of death. The angel of death actually cuts you out, takes your soul out of the body. But if God, through the Shekhinah, the divine presence, kisses you, it's a gentle death that, again, is reserved really for the most righteous, the holiest people. But the angel of death can't even come close to these people because they're so holy. So the Shekhinah actually does it. It's a much less painful exit. That there is a moment when the body and the soul separate, which is painful, but not for somebody who's righteous, and that the Shekhinah literally comes by and kisses them on the lips. So it's a kiss of death. I mean, you've heard that phrase before, but this kiss of death is not a bad kiss. This is actually like what you would want to aspire to. But if you're that righteous and you get this kiss, then it is not, it's the way to go. Not with the, and again, that's one of the reasons why the angel of death is oftentimes pictured with this, the sin, that you cut them, they were cut off, their bonds were cut off from the body, the soul, the binding fabric, if you will, is cut. And so that's painful when that happens. How painful? I don't know. Let's hope none of us know this for a long time. But again, that's the difference between having the angel of death come to you versus the Shekhinah coming and kissing you on the lips and going that way. So again, eventually your body, your soul, once it's free, that pain is over. It's not like, it's a continuous pain, but the separation, the moment of separation, they saw the rabbinic period. They saw that moment as being a painful one. All right. That's another midrash about his death. And here's another.
Thus Jacob departed this world and entered the world to come, a foretaste of which he had enjoyed here below, like the other two patriarchs, and none beside among men. In another respect, their life in this world resembled their life in the world to come. The evil inclination had no power over them, either here or there, wherein David resembled them.
That's kind of an interesting thing to think about, right? That one of the things, again, about these patriarchs that, again, makes them like no other people is, and again, they get to go to heaven in a way that most people don't get to go, either at a higher level or at a level that, or in a way that is special. That the evil inclination doesn't have any power over them.
Which means when David screwed up, it was entirely his fault. He couldn't blame the evil inclination.
Yeah, or as the rabbis like to tell us, he was on a divine mission. He was on a mission from God, as they say in the Blues Brothers. In that David is wrong in the ways he goes about things, but he's trying his best to do God's work. He gets blood on his hands and he doesn't do it in the right way. But including the worst example of this, the story of Bathsheba, he was doing God's work or doing what he was supposed to do. Again, not in the way he should have done it, but he still did what he had to do. And again, in that case, it's again somewhat rescuing Bathsheba from Uriah in the sense that she was married to someone she shouldn't have been. All these kind of weird examples of what he did that the rabbis kind of justified what he did. But again, it is strange because like normally you'd say, oh, King David is like the poster child for impulsiveness, right? Of the evil inclination, maybe not having complete hold over him. He does a lot of good things. Obviously, we love David. The Bible loves David, but he does seem to be someone who is not quite perfect in his behavior. The rabbis want to every time vindicate him, and even again say that he's like the patriarchs in that he doesn't have the same problem with evil inclination that you or I do have, which is, again, it can get us into trouble because we're just human beings. And human beings are, and again, it's a good thing to think about right now at Rosh Hashanah, right, at Yom Kippur, we are human, and that we have this Yetzer Hara, we have this evil inclination. It's just a part of who we are. It's not an excuse. It's not an explanation that, it doesn't give us a pass at all, because again, we're supposed to have power over it. But it's really interesting, by the way, since we have the evil inclination here, folks. We've been talking about the Yetzer Hara. We've been talking about this evil inclination for thousands of years, and we've recognized it. It's not necessarily in the Torah, though, again, the rabbis say that it's hinted at all over the place. But it's interesting, though, that we as Jews understood that we have an impulse, we have an inclination that's a part of who we are. It's part of the human fabric. Again, to go back to the beginning and to go back to something we talk about usually at Rosh Hashanah, in the Torah service, that when God looked at human beings and said, Tov Me'od, they're very good, the rabbi said that actually the Me'od part is specifically addressing the evil inclination. That without the evil inclination, we wouldn't be human beings. That's what makes us human. And so God must have said, this is the way I wanted it. So we recognize evil inclination as who we are, and we've said it for a long time. What's really interesting is that I think to some extent in our world today, we've come back, and we don't call it the evil inclination. We don't call it that. But we do actually today kind of come back to the same conclusion, right? Because as we have embraced the science of genetics and understanding more that our brain and our actions are oftentimes a physiological response and a makeup of our serotonin levels and and literally the morphology and the physiology, part of who we are. We are coming back to a kind of an understanding of human behavior where we're saying, look, this isn't just stuff that we're learning. It's not learned behavior. It's not, we had a bad experience, we're in a bad situation, but that we literally are hardwired to do some of the things that we do that we don't like doing. And so it's interesting that we've kind of come back to the evil inclination in our modern society and with our modern science. We're kind of saying, look, this is who we are. That doesn't give us an excuse to do it, right? We can't go into trial and say, at least yet, we can't go into trial and say, if you look at his serotonin levels, if you look at who he is physiologically, he was hardwired to do it. It doesn't get us off the crime. But there is an understanding that maybe if we are not, taking medication, or if we're not, in constant analysis and feedback and having people check on us, if we have certain things going on with us, we're hardwired to do some pretty tough, bad things, if you will. So we kind of almost have come back to this. We really have, we're closer to living with this reality than probably ever in human history, where everybody is talking about this, of who we are, by our nature rather than our nurture. So it's interesting that the rabbis would be very much at home in that discussion. So that is interesting that, again, there are individuals who don't seem to behave like normal people, but they're few and far between. They don't normally walk around this planet. So here we go. Here's what happens now that Jacob is not alive and is now completely gone from this world.
Joseph ordered his father's body to be placed upon a couch of ivory, covered with gold, studded with gems, and hung with drapery of byssus and purple. Fragrant wine was poured out at its side, and aromatic spices burnt next to it. Heroes of the house of Esau, princes of the family of Ishmael, and the lion Judah, the bravest of his sons, surrounded the sumptuous bier of Jacob. Come, said Judah to his brothers, let us plant a high cedar tree at the head of our father's grave. Its top shall reach up to the skies. Its branches shall shade all the inhabitants of the earth, and its roots shall grow down deep into the earth unto the abyss. For from him are sprung 12 tribes, and from him will arise kings and rulers, chapters of priests prepared to perform the service of the sacrifices, and companies of Levites ready to sing psalms and play upon sweet instruments.
Yep. So some beautiful language here, again, reminding us that as Israelites, as Bnei Israel, as Jews, we're all connected back to Jacob. So we're all part of that tree. And we still use those roots and tree analogy or a symbol for families, right? The family tree, the roots. We have a common root, and we go off in all these different directions, but we're one tree. So we still use that image. A cedar tree was considered to be, like the cedars of Lebanon, a very strong tree, right? A tree that grew large and was a symbol of strength. And it's, again, a reminder of all the special people that will come off of him, priests and kings, and all these people that'll come off of this line of Jacob. What's interesting too is that according to this Midrash, other people came to take part in the ceremony. And it says, heroes of the house of Esau, as well as princes of the family of Ishmael, which is an interesting image, right? Because Esau was the ancestor of the Romans, and then, of course, the Christians. Ishmael is the ancestor of the Arabs and the Muslims. So what this is saying is that those peoples who, again, religious development, they come after us, right? They're our younger brothers, if you will, religiously. But at least, again, according to the Torah, Esau is an older brother, and of course, Isaac's older brother was Ishmael. So these are actually older groups who covered.
Just let you know that it doesn't go unnoticed.
Okay, hold it a second. That's somebody else on the phone. So what we have is Jews, Christians, and Muslims all coming together for this funeral, which again is telling you how important he was. That this
it was painful. So even though I'm older, I decided to have the surgery.
all the time.
So I had it in February, and by April I was.
Sorry. So what it tells us is that everybody came together for this funeral. It is a interfaith, as we would call it, an interfaith event, which again tells us how important Jacob was, but also kind of, again, gives us this important idea that if we can come together for funerals, shouldn't we be able to come together for other things too? And it kind of shows us again what the power of Jacob was, which was that he affected everybody. So let's read what happens at the funeral.
The sons of Jacob tore their garments and girded their loins with sackcloth, threw themselves upon the ground, and strewed earth upon their heads until the dust rose in a high cloud. And when Asenath, the wife of Joseph, heard the tidings of Jacob's death, she came, and with her came the women of Egypt to weep and mourn over him. And the men of Egypt that had known Jacob repaired there, and they mourned day after day, and also many journeyed down into Egypt from Canaan to take part in the 70 days mourning made for him.
Keep going. Well, what do you want?
The Egyptians spoke to one another, saying, Let us lament for the pious man, Jacob, because the affliction of the famine was averted from our land on account of his merits. For instead of ravaging the land for 42 years, according to the decree of God, the famine had lasted but 2 years, and that was due to the virtues of Jacob.
Yeah, so here's an interesting thing here, which is that the famine was originally supposed to be a lot longer and kept getting cut down because of Jacob, because of, and it must have been a horrible famine that, what was 42 years ends up being 2 years. But this is something that, again, that they recognize that Jacob was the one who saved them, not just his family, but other people too. The Egyptians get saved, but you can see that people even came down from Canaan to be part of this funeral. The kids, his children, are doing what you do when you're mourning, right? You tear your garments. We don't so much gird our loins with sackcloth anymore, but again, we do show our grief in different ways. And it tells us the Egyptians also were overcome with mourning. And what's interesting here is this Midrash definitely follows the tradition that Asenath is Egyptian. In the plain reading of the text, she's the daughter of Potipharah, a priest of On, and that she was a good Egyptian woman, but she's also a good woman who, according to another Midrash, took care of Jacob in his old age, was kind of his nurse. And because of her connection to Jacob, she leads the women in mourning, the Egyptian women in mourning for him. So it wasn't just Jews, it wasn't just the family, it was other people. Now, what I think is interesting about this Midrash, I want to point out, is there is a, and it still exists, folks, by the way, that one of the ways that we kind of measure a person is by the way people mourn them, whether people mourn them. And it's it'd be nice to always be remembered in life, but again, a week out of Shiva that I'm at right now, which is kind of weird. We can have whatever. So, well, I'm still in the Shloshim period, but the way people mourn, and the way people remember, is oftentimes the greater indicator of again, how we measure a life. Again, is it the way we'd like it to be? People should feel that in life. Hopefully they feel some of that in life, but oftentimes, again, it's the words and the actions that people show when a person dies. And so Jacob is kind of this, he's so virtuous, he's so important that there is this outpouring of grief. And what this Midrash shows us is that when, in a weird way, and we still have this in the Jewish world, when somebody in our community dies, and their effect and the way that they're remembered spills over into the non-Jewish world. And again, we don't really know. I mean, when did this become I wouldn't say an obsession, but when did this become important for us as Jews? Well, at least by the rabbinic period, at least by the time when we were interacting with Gentiles in a way where they oftentimes have more power than us. What I'm saying is, we don't know that like during the time of King David and King Solomon, Israelites were as concerned with our people being recognized when they died by Gentiles. By the time of the rabbinic period, when Jews were no longer in power, that is an issue for us, which is, does the loss of this person have an effect on the Gentile world? And And that definitely is being conveyed in the Midrash here. It's also conveyed in other places where it's appropriate, or where you could have it, where the death of one of our ancestors has a profound effect on the rest of the world. And so we still do that. So when a Jewish person dies and they're included in the necrology at the end of the Oscars, you go, oh, that's that guy, right? That's that actor, that's that producer that passed away, who's Jewish. By the way, he's Jewish. I mean, we do that today. And again, one of the kind of indicators of this is, again, did the person get an obituary in the New York Times? I mean, I'm telling you, this is still an issue for us. This is still an issue for us today. This is an issue for us today. Because I'm just going to tell you. I mean, we were on the border. We were on the fence of putting something. So there was a question of whether the New York Times was going to do an obituary for my dad. Well, they didn't. And then there was a question of whether we were going to do a paid obituary, which, obviously you have to pay money. And I said, no, we're not going to do a paid obituary in the Times. In the end, it was my call. And I said, no, because I quite frankly, it would have been nice if they had done it, but I'm not going to pay for it. And I don't care that much about it, but I get it. And I understand why people do care. And I do understand why that's a bigger issue. Whether somebody is recognized in the Jewish world and only in the Jewish world, or whether they're recognized outside of the Jewish world, this was an issue for the rabbis, knowing that, again, that rabbi was so important, or that Jewish personage was so important, that even the Gentiles noticed it. That's what just happened in this Midrash. This Midrash just tipped its hand again to where we were at a certain period, and still are, culturally and kind of societally, that we need to be recognized, and our people need to be recognized by the non-Jewish world. That to some extent you don't make it until you've been recognized by them, not by us, but by them. When they're writing about you, when they're talking about you, and when you're mourned by them, then you've really made it. So I will tell you that that's there. It is something that again is still with us to this very day. And again, for better or worse, it indicates a little bit of the mindset of being in the diaspora, being, again, in a situation where we're still obsessed with who's a Jew and who's recognized, again, by the rest of the world. This person's famous, or this athlete is recognized as this guy's Jewish, by the way. That we still do that. So this is still very much a part of who we are when it comes to talking about Jews in life and in death. So let's read what happens about specifically about the embalming. These next couple of paragraphs are going to be about that process, which is, as we said, a little problematic. Not what good Jews, especially this really good Jew, Jacob, would have normally happened. So here's what we got.
Joseph ordered the physicians to embalm the corpse. This he should have refrained from doing, for it was displeasing to God, who spoke, saying, "Have I not the power to preserve the corpse of this pious man from corruption? Was it not I that spoke the reassuring words, 'Fear not the worm, O Jacob, you dead Israel'?" Joseph's punishment for this useless precaution was that he was the first of the sons of Jacob to suffer death. The Egyptians, on the other hand, who devoted 40 days to embalming the corpse and preparing it for burial, were rewarded for the veneration they showed. Before he destroyed their city, God gave the Ninevites a 40 days respite on account of their king, who was the Pharaoh of Egypt. And for the 70 days of mourning that the heathen made for Jacob, they were recompensed at the time of Ahasuerus. During 70 days, from the 13th of Nisan, the date of Haman's edict ordering the extermination of the Jews, until the 23rd of Sivan, when Mordecai recalled it, they were permitted to enjoy absolute power over the Jews.
So here's a weird little midrash that what do we get from the 40 days of preparation? Well, let's first say Joseph is punished for what he did. I mean, that's a pretty serious punishment.
Yeah.
He dies before, and we know he dies at 110. We know he dies younger, substantially younger. He said 37 years younger than his father. I mean, this is a substantial difference. And he dies young. And again, we don't know when the other brothers died. We don't read about it. We only read about Joseph's death at the end. It's a pretty big punishment. So this is not a good thing. The rabbis kind of felt he died too young, at the ripe old age of 110, but he could have lived even longer. So they don't want, they want to give a reason for that, why he dies young. So we already, kind of know that there are things that Joseph does that the rabbis are not 100% okay with. And this is one of them. This is one of them. This is one of those things that could have put him, in need for punishment. Interestingly, though, even though Joseph should have known better, the Egyptians didn't. They didn't know better. And for the fact that they did their best in their way, they're actually rewarded. So the Midrash says Joseph is punished, but the people who did it get rewarded. Why? Because they don't know any better. And they offered him their best services, if you will. So there is 40 days. And of course, we have some 40 days coming up. Actually, we have one we're going to read at Yom Kippur. The story of Nineveh and the fact that Jonah tells the people of Nineveh 40 days more and Nineveh will be overturned. Now, this happens much, much after this time, 500 years roughly after, 700s instead of the 1200s. So it happens a lot longer that the Ninevites are spared. And Nineveh is in modern day Iraq, right? It's in the city of Mosul. And here we're in Egypt. So how do we get so far apart? Well, to some extent, there's this kind of Jewish understanding is they're all Gentiles, so they're all connected somehow. That's a little bit there. But no, the rabbis go even further because the Pharaoh, they have a tradition that Pharaoh somehow wound up either being Nebuchadnezzar, this Pharaoh, or maybe even the king who's alive at the time of Jonah, which means that he lives a ridiculously long amount of time. Almost, by the way, one would say, miraculous. God did it for a reason. Yes, there is a tradition that Pharaoh, or at least this Pharaoh, who maybe is the Pharaoh of the slavery time, which doesn't seem to be, again, well, if he's superhuman, has superhuman lifespan. But the rabbis really kind of like this idea that this Pharaoh is like a perpetual enemy of ours who knows us, kind of respects us, but at the same time is there to be punished all the time. And so they have this midrash that he's the guy that's around here too, hundreds of years later during the time of Jonah. So that's one possibility. Again, strange, but we've seen stranger in the Midrash. And again, there's another connection, they say, to the 40 days of the Jews being under Haman's edict, that this was the reason that Jews were in a precarious situation for 40 days is because they took care of Jacob's body. So again, these were times that they could find where we were under the control of the Gentile, that 40 days winds up being a period of time where they get a break, they catch a break. So there's an interesting connection. Those 40 days. Again, we're in a 40-day period now, from the beginning of Elul to the end of Yom Kippur. These 40 days are times of we get a breather. It's a bonus period from God, if you will, to get our act together. And sometimes the Gentiles got one too, because of the way they treated Jacob's body. All right, now here we have a very interesting discussion about Joseph. Why Joseph? Why does it tell us that Joseph gets to go to the land of Canaan to go there for his father's burial? Well, it's really important because, folks, from what we know, up until this time, Joseph never went back to Canaan. No, not to see his dad, not to reunite with his dad when he came back, not to see his brothers, not to go against his brothers, not to do anything. Joseph hasn't, according at least to the book of Genesis, left Egypt. But even if he did, he didn't go to Canaan until now. And so the Midrash is going to deal with that. Why does he go to Canaan now? And how does he go to Canaan now? All right.
When all preparations for the burial of Jacob had been completed, Joseph asked permission of Pharaoh to carry the body up into Canaan. But he did not himself go to put his petition before Pharaoh, for he could not well appear before the king in the garb of a mourner, nor was he willing to interrupt his lamentation over his father for even a brief space and stand before Pharaoh and prefer his petition. He requested the family of Pharaoh to intercede for him with the king, for the additional reason that he was desirous of enlisting the favor of the king's relations, lest they advise Pharaoh not to fulfill his wish. He acted according to the maxim, seek to win over the accuser that he cause you no annoyance.
Yeah, so what this takes into consideration is that Pharaoh didn't want him to go. Pharaoh, this isn't easy for Joseph to do. This takes into consideration that as much as Joseph's in charge of much of Egypt, if not again, he's the second in command. Joseph can pretty much do everything he wants. Can't do everything he wants. And one of the things that he can't do is he can't travel abroad, or at least he can't go back to Canaan, which is an interesting kind of midrash about why he doesn't go back. Why didn't he go back during the last period of time that Pharaoh put him in charge of everything, ever since the dream? Why did he never go? And that is this idea that he couldn't go. He couldn't go. That Pharaoh wouldn't let him go. This idea that maybe, again, he's so valuable to the Egyptians that he can't leave. He's almost like a hostage, which is really strange because, again, we usually understand Joseph that when he becomes second only to Pharaoh, that he's like, he can do anything he wants. It's over for him, right? The roller coaster is over, finally. He stops at the top, he's at the peak, and that's it. The interesting thing about the way the rabbis read the story is that Joseph actually, to some extent, becomes a hostage. That even though it's a gilded cage, it's still a cage. He's not under house arrest so much as he is not able to go overseas. That, again, maybe the Egyptians saw him as like a good luck charm, a physical, like a talisman, that if he goes, they're going to hell. So he becomes a victim of his own success, if you will. So Pharaoh is not going to let him go. This is something big that he's asking for, which, again, you would think, can he do anything he wants? The Midrash touches on something that we kind of have in the Torah, which is, why does he never go? And, why does he never go back home? Why did he never bring his brothers down? Why didn't he go see his brother? Why didn't he go see his dad? I mean, bigger issues, why didn't he go see his dad? So now it tells us he had to call in some favors just to go for the funeral. All right. This is crazy. I mean, again, it's not what you'd expect, but tells you a little bit about where the rabbis were, the mindset of what's going on really for Joseph.
Joseph applied first to the queen's hairdresser, and she influenced the queen to favor him. And then the queen put in a good word for him with the king.
Yeah, now this is crazy because like he's like the second most powerful person in the country. And who does he go to? He goes to the queen's hairdresser. It's almost literally like it doesn't matter what his job is or what his role is, that he's an Israelite. At the end of the day, as much power as he has, he's not part of the inner circle. And like it's almost as if they've gone back to Joseph is the court Jew, but he's not as powerful. He can't do anything he wants. When it comes to making financial decisions for the country, maybe he can do it, but he doesn't have the king's ear. He can't talk to the Pharaoh about basic things for himself, which kind of still indicates this powerlessness that he has, which again, maybe is more indicative of what powerlessness Jews felt that they had for so long. That even if a Jew was in the court, like Mordecai, we can list off hundreds of people, including people with the last name Rothschild or Warburg, or any of the people who the last 200 years of European history, they may have had a lot of money, but when it came to actually getting access and being able to have any power, any power within the court, they didn't have it because they weren't family. They weren't married into the family. They didn't have that credibility. They were always the court Jew. So suddenly we've gone back to this with Joseph, that he's the court Jew. He's not really anything more important than that. So
But it could also be that Pharaoh is erratic. I mean, if you're dealing with an erratic ruler, you know where I'm getting at, right? Then you might think, well, gee, I know Ivanka's hairdresser.
I listen, I do think that there's an issue here about what they compared it to. And yes, they compared it to the Roman rulers or the later on the
Even if you were, you had an official position that was, and you weren't, you were as waspy as anybody, you could still feel that you needed to go have this extra channel. That's
true, but I don't know. As you read this, I think there's an ethnic component here to this. Which
I can see there is one, but I'm saying that it might be good advice even if you weren't concerned about ethnicity.
I hear you. That is definitely true. But there's this weird piece that's still reflected here, which it's only starting to change now, and it's only starting to change now because it never existed. Well, I'm saying it never existed. It existed so few times in the last 2,000 years. Well, first of all, the only example of this is probably not real, which is the story of Esther being married to Ahasuerus, because we don't know that the Persian, and we know actually the opposite, that Persian kings did not marry outside of the Persian families, royal families. But it's not until we've gotten to the point where Jews are actually part of the family. Look, I mean, that. We're obsessed with Ivanka. We're obsessed with, Emhoff being, Kamala's husband is Jew. Everybody's like, oh, we're married into it now, And so there's an idea that those the proximity that we have now is real because it's not just political. It's not just monetary. It's just not. It's not just, oh, that guy's so rich, you can't ignore him. Well, yeah, you can, because the guy was Jewish, and that meant he didn't come to the party. He wasn't at the party because they only had Gentiles at the party. They're only Christians with that around that table, right? Around the family.
They couldn't eat their food.
Exactly. So this is
this is a reflection of the reality of today, which never really existed. I mean, from what we know, I mean, maybe it did like during King Solomon's time, because it says he married a lot of foreign women, but literally it almost is only possible with intermarriage. And again, I'm not, that's not a statement on intermarriage in my like views of this, but it's just a reality. It doesn't happen until today, where we even now are going to say, hey, you know what, that isn't her husband Jewish, isn't, and we do it with everybody. Hillary Clinton's, that Bill and Hillary Clinton's son-in-law is Jewish. Everybody, has to have a Jew. Look, there's even a Bush. Even one of the Bushes is married to Jews. Neil Bush's daughter is married to Ralph Lauren's son, right? So I love that. Lauren Lifshitz is, so we now have Jews placed in all the royal families, if you will, in America. So believe me, I mean, this is significant from the standpoint of it hasn't existed in thousands of years, literally maybe 3,000 years of Jewish history. And by the way, it's not these are American Jews. And again, this isn't Netanyahu's family. It's not like their royal families married into each other. These are American families married to other American dynasties, if you will. So anyways, let's see that this is definitely something Jewish here. Right.
At first, Pharaoh refused the permission craved by Joseph, who, however, urged him to consider the solemn oath he had given his dying father to bury him in Canaan. Pharaoh desired him to seek absolution from the oath, but Joseph rejoined, "Then will I apply also for absolution from the oath I gave you," referring to an incident in his earlier history.
Yeah, so pause right here. I want to make one point. Here, the Midrash says specifically that Pharaoh wouldn't let him go, that Pharaoh actually said no to him. Not in the Torah, but there definitely seems to be this hint that it could have happened or it might have happened that Pharaoh wouldn't let him do it. So here this Midrash flat out says that Pharaoh said no. So Pharaoh says, no, you promised your dad, but get out of it. Get an absolution from the oath. Say kol nidre, right? Do the kol nidre. Do whatever ritual you have to do. Don't make this oath. You don't have to do this oath. Get out of this oath. So now, what is the oath that Joseph is referring to?
The grandees of Egypt had advised Pharaoh against appointing Joseph as viceroy, and they did not recede from this counsel until Joseph, in his conversation with the Egyptian king, proved himself to be master of the 70 languages of the world, the necessary condition to be fulfilled before one could become ruler over Egypt. But the conversation proved something else, that Pharaoh himself was not entitled to Egyptian kingship because he lacked knowledge of Hebrew. He feared if the truth became known, Joseph would be raised to his own place, for he knew Hebrew beside all other tongues. In his anxiety and distress, Pharaoh made Joseph swear an oath never to betray the king's ignorance of Hebrew. Now, when Joseph threatened to have him himself absolved from this oath, as well as the one to his dying father, great terror overwhelmed him, and he speedily granted Joseph permission to go up to Canaan and bury his father there.
Yeah, so what happens here is that Joseph essentially
Blackmail.
Yeah, it's blackmail. That's the word. He blackmails Pharaoh into saying, wait a second, I know a secret about you, which is that you don't know Hebrew. Now, of course, he knows Hebrew, right? So this is Joseph knows Hebrew. Joseph was raised speaking Hebrew. And so one of the criteria that, again, we don't know that this is the case in Egypt, but it's kind of funny that the pharaohs needed to know all these languages, all the languages of the world, which, the rabbis have at 70, that this was one of the requirements. And so here we learn that Pharaoh didn't know them and didn't know all the languages. So, and Joseph knew this. So and Joseph qualified. So here's the issue. Can Joseph be the king of Egypt? So this is a weird kind of midrash, which is that Joseph may have been, or not may have been, seems to have been more capable and worthy of being Pharaoh than the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh knows this, and so, and so wants to keep power. Now, again, this seems to be that the Pharaoh is ruling by some kind of meritocracy rather than the fact that his father was Pharaoh and his father's father, etc. That there's the dynasty. But it could also reflect this idea that Jews had about Egypt, which was, again, not contemporary with when this was written during the time of Joseph, or even, again, when Joseph was written, when the story in Genesis was written, which might have been hundreds of years after the Pharaohs. I mean, that's the weird thing about the Torah, is that the Torah, even if it's written during the time of Moses, the Egyptian pharaohs have already been on the thrones for thousands of years. I mean, that's the crazy thing. Like, there's almost as much time has elapsed between the pharaohs and Moses as there is from Moses to us. I mean, that's the crazy thing about how long the pharaohs ruled for and how long Egypt was a dynasty for, was that they were already ancient by the time of the rabbis. This was already ancient history to them. So they're kind of reading their own history back into this. They're kind of showing more of a Roman era type understanding of meritocracy, that there was some idea that the rulers had to be knowledgeable and they had to be there had to be some merit to their power. And again, Joseph knows the backstory.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
little off the subject, but not really. But I'm seeing similarities between Joseph and the early days of Moses. Am I crazy?
No, that's something the rabbis definitely had as their kind of in their, and we're going to see it a little bit more, because I promise you that's one of the reasons I want to read the Midrash, is because I want you to see the Midrash. Why we're going to continue into Exodus next is because I want you to see the Midrashim about Moses' birth, because it's not in the Torah. As we talked about numerous times. There's 24 verses from the beginning of chapter 1 to him going to Midian.
Right.
So most of what we saw in the Ten Commandments movies and every other movie is the Midrash. And a lot of that Midrash was product of the same mind that wrote this Midrash about Joseph's time in Egypt. And again, partly it's because they both lived in Egypt and they weren't separated by that many years. And kind of in the rabbis' minds, they're right after each other. And so it was natural for them to do that. But there is this kind of, Joseph kind of sets the stage for Moses being the Jew that makes it in Egypt, that makes it in the court. So number one, that means that Moses, there is a role model for Moses. There's somebody who's done it before. And as successful as Joseph is, Joseph's essentially, they overwrite his history. So that's in the background. That's part of the power of Joseph. And then Moses' story is that it doesn't matter whether Moses was adopted into the royal family, he's still a Hebrew. So that's, the connections are really important. And again, this connection to Daniel, which we read, and again, a court Jew in Nebuchadnezzar's time, hundreds of years later, who rises to the top. And then, of course, Esther and Mordecai in the court of Ahasuerus, these people who make it, but even when they've made it, they are in a precarious situation, and it can all get taken away from them immediately, which I think, again, is indicative of, even if the stories themselves in the Bible don't always touch on that, that's the Jewish experience. The Jewish experience was that guy who may have been friendly with Caesar Augustus or Caesar Romero. No, if they're friends with any of the Caesars, it don't matter, because if that Caesar gets assassinated, all your connections are now nothing. Not only are they nothing, you better find a way out, because if you're too close to that guy, they may come after you too. So Yeah, this was more indicative of again, and again, there were Jews that lived in Babylonia that lived in Persia, and we call it Babylonia, the Babylonian Talmud, the exilarchs, the Jews who were, according to tradition, descendants of King David, who were the essentially the Jews in charge of the Jewish community in the diaspora during the time when there were the Byzantines. The Sassanid rulers of Persia had these Jewish rulers who were essentially like autonomous rulers. They also served at kind of the graces of whoever the king of Persia was at the time. So yeah, this is indicative of, again, much of what Jewish history was like. Didn't matter when the new king came in, and especially if it was a dynasty that was not well grounded. I mean, even with families, the son may have favorites, and then the father's favorites are all on the out. It's what happens. And again, we have it today. To use the modern equivalent, we have different parties that come in, and everything is done. I mean, everybody knows that. I mean, anybody who's in the White House, and is part of the staff of administration cabinet. I mean, there are times, and we kind of look at those times as good times, as stable times, that if you can have the same defense secretary, which we had from Bush Jr. to Obama, when you can keep people in the same job, it's actually kind of saying, let's not toss everything out. When you toss everybody out, there's a learning curve. Even the best of circumstances, you've got a learning curve, and it's not going to get, you got to bring in the new group. I mean, it's almost a certainty that there ain't, if Trump loses, there is nobody from his administration that's going to be in the next administration. I mean, we all know that this is going to be a full out clean house, and there's not going to be there's not going to be anything left. This is what happens. And if you're a Jew who happen to be close to Trump, you're almost guaranteed they don't want to see you around in the next administration.
Probably writing your resume right now, I hope.
Yeah, and if you're one of those guys, it's a precarious situation, and it's one that it's not good. It doesn't indicate like stability, because again, you want people who know the inner workings of the EPA or
Right.
the Department of Agriculture, whatever it is. You want people to know those things. So it's a bad situation.
On the other hand, Trump canned a lot of people who did know those things, so maybe they'll get their jobs back.
Even if the person was good that was brought in, it doesn't matter now. They're gone.
No, they'll have to catch up.
So it's.
I have a cousin that was working for Homeland Security that, quote, retired, 3.5 years ago.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot more of those very quick exits. And again, it's not indicative of good times in government when we have those complete rotations and I mean it costs lives, folks. It's not a joke, because there's people, especially in the intelligence community, when you clean house at the top, where you have people, you have field agents out there, you've got people who are helping with information out there, that lives are in jeopardy when people aren't, when we don't know what's going on. So it's a really serious issue. There's a life or death issue, and you're going to see it again. Maybe, who knows? I mean, but even when the same party wins, there's oftentimes there's a clean house. And again, just because I remember when George W. was elected, there's a real question: does he bring in his people from his fathers? He didn't bring in a lot of his father's people, folks. A lot of those people that his father relied on, for better or worse. And I'm not going to talk about whether you think these people are good or not. It doesn't matter. He didn't bring them in. He brought in his own people, and I remember at the time people were worried about George W. bringing in some of the State Department people that George H.W. had, who were not very pro-Israel, and there was a real worry that if George W. brings those people in, it's not going to be good for Israel. It turned out those people didn't come. So I'm talking specifically about Jim Baker and some other people that were part of George Senior's administration, that people in Israel were like, please don't bring those people in. Turned out George W. listened a lot more to the the other folks that were not that, some people call them neocons, whatever, doesn't matter. Point is, whatever you call them, those were more pro-Israel people than his father had. So, well, I'd say pro-Israel in the sense that they were not Arabists as some of the State Departments are. That's as political as I'm going to get about that. But I will tell you that just because it's a father and son doesn't mean it's always the same administration. So that went back to the pharaohs and the Caesars and everybody else. This is a precarious situation for Jews to be in when you're relying on the good graces of other people. So let's see what else happens with this approach. Yep.
Okay, where were we? Yes. Scroll up a bit. Thanks. Moreover, Pharaoh issued a decree in all parts of the land, menacing those with death who would not accompany Joseph and his brothers upon their journey to Canaan with their father's remains. And accordingly, the procession that followed the bier of Jacob was made up of the princes and nobles of Egypt, as well as the common people. The bier was borne by the sons of Jacob. In obedience to his wish, not even their children were allowed to touch it. It was fashioned of pure gold, the border thereof inlaid with onyx stones and bdellium, and the cover was gold woven work, joined to the bier with threads that were held together with hooks of onyx stones and bdellium. Joseph placed a large golden crown upon the head of his father, and a golden scepter he put in his hand, arraying him like a living king.
So that's not the way Jews are supposed to be buried.
So that's the way Egyptians are like Tut.
Correct. And what's interesting is that that's a pretty
But
good.
Tut hadn't been discovered yet.
Exactly. It's a pretty good description of what happened, which is strange because this description isn't the way that people were buried normally during the Roman era, even by the Romans. It's a very weird, sometimes the Midrash seems to get historically accurate descriptions of this. This is one of them. And again, yes, as Rosemary said, not only did they not have it, a lot of those tombs had been raided. I mean, just so you know, a lot of those tombs got raided.
Well, they got raided back in the times when this was being written too. So
yes, but they were sometimes raided before.
Were generally raided as soon as the mourners had gone home.
Yes.
I heard an Egyptologist to give a talk once in which she explained that the economy of Egypt would have come crashing to a halt if the tombs weren't robbed, because the next pharaoh needed the gold for his own funeral.
Yep. Yeah, and so it was not like there were a lot of King Tuts lying around that they could go and say, hey, what does this look like? So either the story was preserved or again, maybe there were some people who did this kind of thing, but this is a pretty accurate account of, again, for anyone who remember, I mean, hopefully you all remember what the Tut exhibit, showed us about the amazing work of the Egyptian artisans. And it would have been amazing to them thousands of years ago, obviously too, but still is to us. So the stones, the fact that it's gold, and then again, it looks like literally what a living king would have. So again, scepter, and this was very much the way those Egyptian, at least it appears that they were, because we have pictures of them, even if we don't have a King Tut-like hoard of treasure that we found. So it's pretty wild. So again, we read it before, the other stuff that was used around him were that description of byssus, which is that sea silk, that stuff that's actually not organic material, but it's very, very expensive. And so if you can weave these strands of this crustacean fiber, if you could weave that together, it must be very, very expensive. And so all of these things are part of it. But it's not just the metals and the fabrics. It's more. There's smells too.
The funeral cortege was arranged in this order. First came the valiant men of Pharaoh and the valiant men of Joseph, and then the rest of the inhabitants of Egypt. All were girt with swords and clothed in coats of mail, and the trappings of war were upon them. The weepers and mourners walked, crying and lamenting, at some distance from the bier, and the rest of the people went behind it, while Joseph and his household followed together after it with bare feet and in tears. And Joseph's servants were close to him, each man with his accoutrement and weapons of war. 50 of Jacob's servants preceded the bier, strewing myrrh upon the road in passing, and all manner of perfumes, so that the sons of Jacob trod upon the aromatic spices as they carried the body forward.
Wow. So here you can see it's not just the materials and the amazing things that you could see, right? The visuals, right? It's the word I'm looking for. There's also audio. There's an audio component to this, which is the weeping, the sounds, which again was a Jewish tradition to actually make sure you had the proper amount of weeping, lamenting, crying. Different jobs, by the way. There were people who were really good at weeping, and there were other people who were really good at lamenting. And you hired these people, by the way, just so you know. You actually hired them to weep. There were people who got paid to walk behind the funeral cortege and to cry, a paid crier. Well, I mean, we have actors and stuff today, so I guess it shouldn't surprise us, but we had them back then too. But there's also the smells. And the fact is that it was such a big event, parade, if you will, that they actually threw out myrrh, which, as you know, right? We know from the gifts for the baby Jesus that myrrh was up there on the list with gold and frankincense. And again, I was from the life of Brian, not so much with the myrrh next time. They liked the aromatic. Of course, it smells. You need to have nice, better smells when you're transporting a body normally, but not his, because he was embalmed. Now, this is specifically for the amount of opulence attached to this thing. It's not just an outpouring of emotion. It's an outpouring of tremendous wealth to take him up there. So let's read what happens when it gets to Canaan.
Thus the procession moved on until it reached Canaan. It halted at the threshing floor of Atad, and there they lamented with a very great and sore lamentation. But the greatest honor conferred upon Jacob was the presence of the Shekhinah, who accompanied the cortege. The Canaanites had no intention at first to take part in the mourning made for Jacob, but when they saw the honors shown him, they joined the procession of the Egyptians, loosing the girdles of their garments as a sign of grief. Also, the sons of Esau, Ishmael, and Keturah appeared, though their design in coming was to seize the opportunity and make war upon the sons of Jacob. But when they saw Joseph's crown suspended from the bier, the Edomite and Ishmaelite kings and princes followed his example and attached theirs to it too, and it was ornamented with 36 crowns.
Wow. So again, the tribes and the nations that may already made up the Edomite and Ishmaelite kings, that they paid honor to this as well. They again came out to do war against, make war against us, but they eventually showed their respect to Jacob. And so here, Keturah's sons are also added to the list: Esau, Ishmael, and Keturah. Again, Abraham's wife that he has other children with. So these technically would be younger than Isaac, and younger. They'd be younger than us, but they're also again people that would make up the Middle East, the ancient Middle East, who would have been our enemies normally, but not today. Not today. Not on the not on this. And again, the weird thing is that this is actually explaining something that happens in the Torah. And so, the rabbis here are actually trying to do something, which is explain this weird story in the Torah that tells us that it tells us that it says that all the children of the flocks left with the Egyptian dignitaries. They left the region of Goshen and chariots and horsemen. And then it says when they came to Goren Atad, right, which is beyond the Jordan, they beheld there a very great and solemn lamentation, and he observed a mourning period of 7 days for his father. When the Canaanite inhabitants of the land saw the mourning at Goren Hatah, they said, this is a solemn mourning on the part of the Egyptians. That's why the place is named Abel Mitzrayim, which means, which is beyond the Jordan. So Abel Mitzrayim literally means like the mourning or the mourners of Egypt, the place of mourning for the Egyptians. So this is an example of the place name being attached to a life of the patriarchs. But it's strange because it also, again, gives us this explanation for this entry into the land of Canaan, which of course is the precursor for our entry into the land of Canaan during the time of Moses. So it's almost like this body, which we, again, is almost like the ark and the tabernacle that we're going to come in when we come back. We're going to come here. So this is like a little bit of a foretaste, right? This is a little bit of a reenactment, a pre-enactment of pre-enactment. Did I just make up that word, a pre-enactment? I just made up that word, pre-enactment of what will happen when the Israelites come in with Moses and then Joshua. They'll do this. So this is what happens.
Preview?
Yeah, it's a preview, but I just thought of pre-enactment. I just made that up. Look that up. Maybe I made up a word. I made up a word. No, I don't know if I made it up. I just never heard the word. All right, so they are coming in. Hold it 1 second, just to make sure we can get to, we're going to get to we're going to get to what happens when they do this. And again, this part is not in the Torah, but it's kind of hinted at, or the possibility of this is hinted at in the Torah. So here's what happened.
Nevertheless, the conflict was not averted. It broke out in the end between the sons of Jacob and Esau and his followers. When the former were about to lower the body of their father into the cave of Machpelah, Esau attempted to prevent it, saying that Jacob had used his allotted portion of the tomb for Leah, and the only space left for a grave belonged to himself. For, continued Esau, though I sold my birthright to Jacob, I yet have a portion in the tomb as a son of Isaac.
Whoa, so let's just hear, again, let's say it. You heard it, but let's repeat it. Esau wants to be buried in the cave of Machpelah, and he is now going to stop his twin brother, who he's, again, according to this, he's still alive. Esau is still alive when this happens. Right? And so, which again, you think Jacob lives a long time, well, Esau is still alive. So, and again, is at least in good enough shape to say, not so fast. That's my space. I may have given up everything else, but I didn't give up the place in Machpelah. I didn't give up that place. And so, not so fast. So, what are we going to do here? Because there's only room for one, according to this. And again, if he did have a place, his wife is buried there. So she already died, according to the Midrash. Then we never read about Leah dying, but let's assume that, again, following this logic, Esau is going to say, no, you're not buried here. Here's what happens.
The sons of Jacob, however, were well aware of the fact that their father had acquired Esau's share in the cave, and they even knew that a bill of sale existed. But Esau, assuming properly that the document was left behind in Egypt, denied that any such had ever been made out, and the sons of Jacob sent Naphtali, the fleet runner, back to Egypt to fetch the bill.
So this is a really good lesson. Making sure
Make sure you got your paperwork on a thumb drive.
Paperwork with you, which I did, by the way, unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago. I had this experience when I went to the cemetery. I had made sure I'd called before, I had had a discussion, but I brought a copy of the cemetery plot.
Yeah.
Not that, again, anybody has to deal with this, and good paperwork and there's good records, but I always recommend if you have your copy, bring the copy. It's not something you want to think about. You don't want to have an argument. You don't want to have to think about it, but it's always good to have that stuff together. And especially, again, if you're preparing it for your loved ones, make sure they have the paperwork, because it's not something you want to have to worry about. You don't want to have a question of, did I prepay for my mortuary services, which I say most people, many people don't do. Buy a plot, but they don't prepay for the mortuary expenses. It's worth thousands of dollars, the mortuary expenses. They are. I mean, people are shocked. They think I paid for the funeral. You didn't pay for the whole thing. You only paid for the plot. So this is an important idea. And again, it's here, and it's not just for funerals, obviously. Whenever you bought something, it's always good to have that receipt with you when it comes time to discuss it. Well, they didn't have it on them. They had it, but they didn't have it with them. But they luckily have Naphtali, who's the very fast guy, right? He's the guy who can run really, really fast. So he's this superpower is speed, as we read, his blessing before. He's the deer of the family. And so he gets to run real fast. So he's going to run back. He'll get it. He'll be back. All right. But what happens while he's gone?
Meantime, while this altercation was going on between Esau and the others, Hushim, the son of Dan, arose and inquired in astonishment why they did not proceed with the burial of Jacob. For he was deaf and had not understood the words that had passed between the disputants. When he heard what it was all about, and that the ceremonies were interrupted until Naphtali should return from Egypt with a bill of sale, he exclaimed with indignation, "My grandfather shall lie here unburied until Naphtali comes back." And he seized a club and dealt Esau a vigorous blow, so that he died, and his eyes fell out of their sockets and dropped upon Jacob's knees. And Jacob opened his own eyes and smiled. Esau being dead, his brother's burial could proceed without hindrance, and Joseph interred him in the cave of Machpelah in accordance with his wish.
So it's pretty wild. It's a pretty wild midrash, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Hushim is again deaf. We know that he had a deaf grandson, but look, he had a lot of grandkids, and it's good to know that there was recognition of different abilities and different challenges that people had, whatever. But he's still got his family's strength, so he actually kills Esau right there. So when does Esau die? Well, Esau died at the funeral of Jacob. He didn't last much longer, at least according to the Midrash. Again, we never knew that Esau was still alive, but he doesn't make it out of the funeral. And to some extent, he could have been buried there now, but he isn't going to be buried. All of this, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but obviously this is the last confrontation between Jacob and Esau. So there's a midrash here that you just read that Jacob and Esau are still not getting along, even at death, and that that Jacob opens his eyes from death when.
Can you see the smile on Jacob's face? Like
he's dead, but his body,
his eyes open up.
his eyes won't let it go. That
Go ahead, go
He
tell
doesn't
mom.
decay,
Go
so
tell mom.
it's crazy, and Hushim knocks him so hard that his eyes come out. And what's the and as that happens, Jacob's eyes open up, and he goes, yeah. So this is interesting midrash, which obviously there was a tradition that Esau fought over the grave, and then this is the response to that. And again, somebody took it up a notch, as the rabbis do in the midrash. You got a story? Oh, I got a better story. You want to lay that story down? Let me tell you how that story ends. And I think this is another example of them doing that. The rabbis getting the next person out there. So and upping them. But So there is probably, again, an interesting thing here, which is that family plots were not always, didn't go smoothly.
I suspect that happens to this day.
Yeah, and I think you know it's probably less of an issue in California, where it's a monetary issue, but it's less of a space issue. But there are real issues in New York cemeteries where families, and not just New York, we have a family plot in Boston. There's other places where, people have been buried for hundreds of years, where, being buried in the family plot is not something that everybody can do. And who has that, plot, who has a claimant on that plot is a big deal. So we actually we have a
Recently
family
in
plot in New York.
Philadelphia,
What?
we one of the big Jewish cemeteries in the Philadelphia area, my grandparents and great grandparents helped found. So there's this big plot with the name on it and a handful of spaces that have not been claimed yet. And it was a big deal. The next generation, so the next, my generation has to take over the running of it. And in order to do that, you have to track down the descendants of everybody who might have been named before. And some of those people have been out of connection for years, decades. And so it was a really interesting lesson in cemetery rules and politics of that in a family.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more of an issue, or became more of an issue in America, where, again, where cemetery plots are very expensive and also limited in some areas. Like, again, California, we just open up a new cemetery, or we expand, Eden and Mount Sinai are adding many, many acres of cemetery spot, but you can't do that in New York. I mean, the new cemetery will be in New Jersey. It's not going to be at the place in Queens or wherever the family is buried. So it is very hard to be in the family plot area. But it also, by the way, Judith, also indicates continuity of the Jewish community in a diaspora community. There were a lot of times when Jewish communities didn't hang around long enough to have plots that were of value. I mean, and again, for a lot of the places, like in the Shtetls, that wasn't a problem. It wasn't a problem of being buried in Russia or Poland. The land was cheap, and it was there was a lot of it was rural, it was rural villages, but not if you lived in a city. I mean, if you lived in Italy, or if you were one of those Jews that lived in the ghetto in Venice, the being able to be buried at the Jewish cemetery out, on the island, was not easy to do. And so if you were one of those Jews that lived in the city, it was not as easy. And again, some extent, it was not an issue for us until the last 50 years, because, we hadn't been in this country as long, but now we have. And now, we have, when I went back to Boston to move Rachel into college, I took her to her great grandparents' grave, my great grandfather's parents' grave. And I said, look, I mean, that we you've come back to an area where we had family buried, going back 7 generations. So it's that is American Jewish history is now becoming history. It wasn't history, even 20 or 30 years ago. It was not very common for someone to have that many generations, because most Jews assimilated. If they went back to the 1700s, very few of those families still exist. In the Sephardic community, some of them do in New York, but not a lot. There's not a lot of Jewish families that can trace themselves back in a continuous area, or a continuous tomb. So these are issues that, again, were probably an issue for some Jewish communities, and you can imagine that there were people saying, you don't get that space, that's our family's space. families would get in fights over it. Maybe not as bad as this one, but again, there's only one cave of Machpelah. If you can be buried in the cave of Machpelah, there's not much more prime real estate than that for a funeral. All right, so let's finish this last section about the cave.
His other children had left all arrangements connected with the burial of their father's body to their brother Joseph, for they reflected that it was a greater honor for Jacob if a king concerned himself about his remains rather than simple private individuals. The head of Esau, as he lay slain by the side of Jacob's grave, rolled down into the cave and fell into the lap of Isaac, who prayed to God to have mercy upon his son, but his supplications were in vain. God spoke, saying, "As I live, he shall not behold the majesty of the Lord."
Yeah, well, so there's something ironic in this. That Esau ends up kind of being buried in there and doesn't do any good. So what is the advantage of being in the presence of these people? They can pray for you. And Isaac, at least when he dies, after he dies, is no longer going to take Esau's side anymore. So, of course, this is more of a comment on the descendants of Esau than Esau himself. Next year, when we meet again, we'll be reading about what happens because of this provocation, that Jacob and Esau's descendants will start fighting, and the fight goes on. The fight between the Jews and the Romans, the Jews and Christians, Jews and the Gentile world, at least the powerful Gentile world, is ongoing. And at least according to the Midrash, it's indicative of problems yet to come between the descendants of Jacob and Esau. So I want to wish everybody a happy new year. Thank you, Judith, for taping some of the service with us yesterday, making sure we could have some of those synagogue traditions that we've had over the years. We're working on, by the way, just so you know, our food drive for the food pantry. We're trying to figure out a time that we can get our youth, our synagogue young people to do a drive-by. We're going to have a drive-through food donation, hopefully scheduled, so that you can come and even though, like we normally do, collect the food for the food pantry, that will actually allow people to socially distance and still make that donation. So we're working on that, and some other things which hopefully you'll get today.
Mark, I thought the food pantry really just wanted cash these days. Am I wrong?
I don't know. We're working with the Sternans, who haven't been able to do their Sternans normally
Right.
here there, but they have not been there since COVID times. Look, we want the kids to feel like they've done something.
I've started volunteering at the food pantry, and I'm aware that they are in need of food. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure, for instance, we're just waiting for the answer, which again I was supposed to get yesterday, but as soon as we get it, we will send it out to everybody, because again, we
got to do this.
Know that
Rabbi, is the answer blowing in the wind?
I don't know. I know, yeah, very funny. I know they need food, so please,
yes,
keep looking for that, because it's one of the more successful food drives, is our food collection for them at Yom Kippur.
Yeah,
So,
we keep them going until Thanksgiving, when everybody starts donating again.
so I'm hoping that they do it. And everybody stay healthy. Happy New Year, everybody. Please finish up the year strong, and we hope to see you in person soon, at least at Tasha, if not soon afterwards, with more stuff in person. So again, keep an eye out for those things too. But Sunday, we are going to do our first in-person synagogue thing in months. So that's Sunday at 2:00 at our place down by the river. All right, everybody, take care. Good to see you all. Good to see you one last time tomorrow night. What am I talking about? Wednesday night. We'll see you too.